right, let's see. Yep, people are coming in. Hello. Hi, everyone. As you're coming in, please let us know where you're tuning in from. We always like to know uh, where folks are watching us from. Um, so don't be afraid. Put things in the chat. Talk with each other. And we'll just wait for the magic number to be reached. We're a few people away. We're kind of halfway there. We have a pretty big audience tonight. So people are really interested in the General and Julia. Um, Hi, William. Good old Connecticut. The big old state of Connecticut. Um, Joyce is in Montreal, not too far away. I'm sure we'll have other people from Connecticut, New England, oh, Terryville. Oh, hi, Al. One of our guides. Um, Warwick, New York, Hudson Valley, one of my favorite places. Mystic is another favorite place of mine. Um, West Hartford, Danbury. Welcome. All right, we'll go ahead and get started and people can come in when they come in. Hi, I'm Omar Acevedo and I'm the literary program coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us for this virtual program for The General and Julia by Jon Clinch. First, I want to thank our sponsors. Our virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are incredibly happy to honor his memory with these programs, and we are also very grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting all of our virtual programs. Please, if you are not a member, please consider becoming a member and supporting our museum. All members receive free admission to our author programs, the House and Museum, year-round discounts in the store and cafe, and much more. And I'll be saying a bit more about that at the end of the program because we have some really cool events coming up. So please visit our website for more information if you're interested in becoming a member. And now on to our guest. Our author, Jon Clinch, is the author of a few acclaimed novels, Finn, Kings of the Earth, The Thief of Auschwitz, Belsoni Dreams of Egypt, and Marley. And our moderator this evening is our very own Mallory Howard, who is the assistant curator here at the Mark Twain House and Museum. Yeah, if you are moved to talk, please do so in the chat. But if you have a question, put that in the Q&A. That's in the lower left of the screen. We just want to have all the questions in one place so they won't get lost in the chat. So that is all from me. I will turn this over to Jon and Mallory. Please sit back and enjoy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Omar. So, Jon, thank you so much for doing this.
Hi, Mallory. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I really do.
And I first just want to start off by thanking you once again. Jon has been a longtime friend to the Mark Twain House and Museum and really saved the museum years ago when we had financial difficulties by rallying his friends and fellow authors together to put on a fantastic fundraising event. So we are always so grateful to you and love having you on. So I just want to start it off by thanking you once again for all the support you've given us over the years.
I really appreciate that, Mallory. You stand on holy ground when you're down there in Hartford, Connecticut, on the old Twain property, and it was really my pleasure and the pleasure of my friends and associates and other writers to help you folks out. You do such great work, and it means a lot to the whole country and the whole world. So thanks for that.
Thank you. So switching gears, I'm very excited to talk to you about The General and Julia. It is a fantastic book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I went through every emotion you could possibly think of, which I usually don't when reading books. So I want to dig into that a little bit later. but can you first just sort of give us a brief overview of the book and why you decided to write this?
The General and Julia is really about, the general is Ulysses Grant, although he is both a young man and an older man and a very old man and a president and a general and a farmer and a guy who sells firewood on the streets of Louisville. I mean, he's all kinds of things. The general is only one of the things that he is. And that's, of course, part of what I wanted to put out there writing the book. It's also about his relationship with his family and his wife. And the main thing in terms of the narrative is that we get a chance to watch their relationship and watch him as they go from the opening scene where he's just courting Julia, and to the end scene, the ending when he passes away and she outlives him. But we also see some of the real low points of his life that most people, I think, don't know about, and that give him a kind of humanity and a kind of deep reality that that only comes from either thinking hard about a character like him and learning all you can, or from the sort of sympathetic imagination that goes with trying to bring him to life in a novel instead of in history. I mean, E.L. Doctorow, the great historical novelist, once said something to the effect of the historian can tell you what happened, the novelist can tell you how it felt. So I'm in the business of telling you how it felt. We start with the facts, and we move along from there. And you had all the feelings, I understand, so that's good.
I did. So what was your research process like in writing this novel?
You know, it was kind of like my research process for writing Finn, which was, I had read Huckleberry Finn a long time ago. My first novel, Finn, it's about Huckleberry Finn's dad. I'd read Huck a long time ago, and there are only 8 chapters in which Finn appears in Huckleberry Finn. So before I lit out into writing that book, I just reread the first 8 chapters of Huckleberry Finn. I mean, it didn't take a lot. Kind of the same thing with The General and Julia. I had read one of the big Grant biographies, Ron Chernow's biography, a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the essential basis of my preliminary understanding of the man. But what I remember sticking with me most from that was the tragedy that he endured and worked his way out of at the end of his life, which kind of becomes the centerpiece of this book, rather than the days in the Civil War or the days in the White House. I wanted to catch him at his lowest point and try to get inside his head during the very bad times. So I started with Chernow a while ago. I did find a book and this is horrible, the title escapes me, but it was, I'll have to remember it, I'm sorry. And I'll have to remember the author as well. I'm sorry about this, but there was a book devoted to the last year or so in Grant's life, which kind of opened up that information to me a little more deeply than I had known before. Mark Twain was helpful to me in research, as he always is, if you're paying attention to that time, that part of the world, and that time in American history. One of the books that was so helpful to me in writing Finn was Life on the Mississippi, which looks back on Twain's childhood, which is about the time that Finn takes place, the time that Huck Finn takes place. That was useful. My experience with that book, my experience with Roughing It, which is closer to the time of the Civil War, and my experience with his big 3-volume autobiography. I kind of like the earlier, skinnier autobiographies better, but the new ones have some information about Ulysses Grant that I found worthwhile.
Those are a big undertaking, because They are big.
Yeah, they are. Two of them are propping up my computer right now. I'd
I was
show
about
you.
to say that's
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah, there's a lot there.
So when you're doing this and you're doing this research, preliminary stuff, and then you go to write it, what is that process like? And do you have more fun doing one versus the other?
Yeah, research is terrifying for, for me. I'm not, well, the best way to describe it is that there's no rabbit hole in the world of research that I will not go down, and where I will not find something fascinating to me that I will need to come back like a golden retriever and show to you. It's this meaningless bone. It's it's a question of who made the fireplace tongs someplace, and you don't need that stuff. And there's a certain measure to which I find myself attracted sort of magnetically to it. And therefore, I need to limit my intake of research. I need to find that point where there's enough, but it's not going to taint my process of doing the work that I need to do.
Right. Well, we are kindred spirits in that I constantly am down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
It is fun, but it is distracting.
Yeah.
Um,
Worst rabbit
so,
hole in the world, of course, is YouTube. So don't
oh
ever
yeah.
think of going there. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the first things I noticed when I started reading your book was the quote you had in the very front. And it says, "Show me a hero and I'll write you a tragedy," which was F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it really got to me. It really sort of dug in. Why did you choose to put that in the book? And how did you go about and why did you choose that quote specifically?
People always ask me how I come up with some of these, every epigraph I have. And I don't really remember they're things I've heard. I usually have to look them up and discover that or make sure that I'm attributing them to the right person. That particular quote, "Show me a hero and I'll write you a tragedy," was actually not from a published novel, but from a letter from Fitzgerald to someone else. So I can't really speak of where it came from. It was one of those things that floats around in your brain. And it seemed to me to just sum up this whole thing and to sum up my prospect for working on this story. Show me a hero. Well, we've all seen the hero. And I'll write you a tragedy, because there were tragic elements of his life that it's really easy to overlook and not even to know, when all you think about a person like Ulysses Grant is, a silhouette against a ruddy sky on a Civil War battlefield, or that grumpy man on the $50 bill. Those are big things. They're part of our culture. And those are the heroic things that you kind of have to get past if you're going to look at the human things. And a human life has tragedy in it, and his sure did.
Just it really just gave me chills being familiar with Grant and his life and what happens. I thought it really set the tone for what you were about to dive into.
It did.
Um, and so when I dove into the book, I noticed the time periods. You sort of go back and forth between different years. Can you talk about why you decided to write it that way?
Yeah, the book is, how can I describe this? The book is kind of a 20-layer cake or something like that.
I like
And the layers are a chronological telling of through his life. I mean, it's not his whole life by any means, and it's just representative moments, but they're outside of him. They're narrative elements that in which he figures. They begin, as we've said, with the courtship of Julia, and they end with his death. But in between them are the to continue the cake analogy. In between them are the layers of icing, and that icing skips all around, because at the end of his life he was so sick. He'd been diagnosed with throat cancer. We'll probably get to that later, I'm sure. And during the last 40 days of his life, he spent them in the Adirondacks, not so far from Connecticut, in the Adirondacks, in a little mountaintop cottage that was loaned to him by a friend to get him out of New York City, get him into the fresh air. And he proceeded over the last 40 days up there to die. During that period, he was so ill, so much in pain, that his doctors, bear with me, gave him medicine, but they didn't know what to do about cancer then. They knew less than we know now. They knew that he was in terrible pain. He knew that he wanted to stay as alert as possible, but nonetheless, he might wake up in the morning and get dosed with an injection of brandy mixed with cocaine. He was given just, Jerry Garcia could not have withstood the onslaught of what
Yes.
Ulysses Grant put up with. And yet he managed to keep himself aware and to get this job done. But it seemed to me that those icing chapters that are all set on Mount McGregor, the place where he died, would give me the opportunity to pretend I was inside his head, his feverish head. He has hallucinations, he has visions, he remembers things rightly and wrongly. He skips around through his life. This poor guy, I mean, he's on his way out the door. He's working to finish his memoirs, so he's willfully digging back into his past. He's there with his family, whom he's enjoying for the last time, and he's on severe doses of medicine / drugs. So that kind of gave me the opportunity, I think, to let his mind sort of float freely and to follow wherever that kind of wanted to take me.
And I know that, interspersed is that time at Mount McGregor as he's actively dying. And at times I really found those parts of the book challenging to read because of how emotional they were. And what was it like for you to write those chapters? I mean, I know, like I said, I'm familiar with Grant's story. I know about the throat cancer, but when you're reading your words and you're able to insert some of those thoughts and conversations, as you mentioned, being in Grant's head, it just made it so much more real to me than it had before. So question is, what was it like to write those particular chapters? And did you find it hard to do that?
Well, it's always hard. Somebody once asked one of my favorite singer-songwriters, Randy Newman, how the songwriting business was going. And his answer was, it keeps getting harder. And I think that makes it, that's sort of the way it is with any art. It just gets harder. Your expectations change and you get older. But so they weren't really any harder than the other. They were kind of a little bit more free form, which either takes more control or less control. I don't know. But in terms of actually writing them, you got to remember that writers put themselves into their books, whether they mean to or not. There's no way to get 300 or 400 page manuscript down on paper, or I don't know, didn't even see it in paper until I saw this. But at any rate, to have those things come out of your head and not reflect yourself in them. So what you have to remember is that this stuff was being written by a man who is aging like the rest of us, a man who has a wife whom he adores, and a child whom he adores, and grandchildren whom he adores. And those were all points of connection between me and Ulysses Grant. I mean, he was a loving husband. He was an adoring grandfather. The children are with him on Mount McGregor, and he's living with his the whole family, wife, sons, daughter, in-laws, and the little children. So to be able to tell a story about a man nearing the end of his life, working to help his family survive after he's lost everything and after he is ultimately gone, and to be in the presence of those he loves. There's a moment when his little granddaughter has learned to play the harmonica, and he's awakened from a nap. Of course, he had to take naps because for all the reasons we've looked at. And someone asks him if he wants to listen to his granddaughter play the harmonica, and his answer, to himself at least, is, if there's time for me to take a nap, there's time for me to do this. And he's torn between working and enjoying his family, aren't we all? So those parts were in a way very personal to me.
Yeah, it beautifully written. Really, really beautifully written. So shifting gears a little bit, one of the things I wanted to bring up that was sort of consistent throughout the book was Grant sort of being caught in between his families, right? He comes from an abolitionist family. That's how he's brought up. However, when he marries Julia, her family own many enslaved people. And as I said, this sort of pops up from time to time. Can you talk a little bit about the role that it played in some of those relationships, whether it's with Julia, his family, or hers?
Yeah, that's such an important part of the book, because, as you say, it was a really important part of his relationship with those around him. Julia came, as you said, from a slaveholding family. Her father was a staunch supporter of the Southern cause. They lived in Missouri, and Grant himself came from Ohio and was brought up in an abolitionist family. They were in love. Her father had no time for Ulysses Grant. Her father saw the older Ulysses Grant as an individual who was about to lay low his way of life, and he had no patience with it. He at one point, and sometimes I don't remember whether this is in the book or in reality or both, but it's generally true that there was always a place at his table for Julia, but not for Ulysses. And their relationship was therefore rocky. He was well known as a terrible person, as a cantankerous old son of a gun. And it was a good opportunity for me to provide a character who was very different from Ulysses Grant, a person who could serve as a foil for him and point out all of his many flaws, and there certainly were many. But as time went by, you need to remember from the beginning, I need to point out that Julia had an enslaved girl who was with her from earliest childhood. She's introduced in the first chapter. The two of them, Julia and the other Julia, who was the slave girl, went by Jewel, the second half of her first name being lopped off for convenience sake. And I think that tells you all you need to know when you get started. The two of them are about the same age. They grew up together. And their relationship was its own singular thing too, that which we could imagine for Julia, of seeming to Julia more innocent and less fraught than it truly was. In fact, as they went through their life, as they went through the Civil War together, Julia quite often traveled with her husband to battles in progress, to where there were things to be done, and she would travel with him and live with him in a tent or in a cabin. And she always brought Jewel with her. Now, that became a bone of contention, as you can imagine, among people who had the idea that it would be a good idea to pick Ulysses Grant apart and to lower his image. And if you could make a big point about how, well, the man who is leading the charge against slavery is traveling around the countryside with his wife and her slave, then you could throw an awful lot of doubt on the man. The thing to remember in that case is one particular thing. that Julia did not own Jewel. Jewel was always owned by Mr. Dent, Colonel Dent, Julia's father. And as a result of that, she comes to a point where after the Emancipation Proclamation is issued, and before it has been adopted in Missouri, poor Jewel has some decisions to make about what her life is going to like in the days ahead. And it's not a spoiler, I wouldn't think. She runs off. She manages to escape from the woman that she has been with in this fraught relationship for her whole life. So she was a very interesting character to me. I didn't want to speak for her, but I let Grant speak for his understanding of her, which is in a sense the same thing as having me do it, because I would never know what's in her head, but neither would he. But I can be sympathetic, and so can he. So
Right.
we'll let him do the talking.
Well, sort of keeping on that track, talking about the Civil War, there's a scene in particular in your book where Ulysses and Julia are talking, and he is sort of grappling with his decision to let off Robert E. Lee and a lot of the other Confederate soldiers after the war ended, and starts to have sort of these guilty feelings. And she sort of tries to soothe him about that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And did he rely on Julia often as this sounding board to work through some of these emotions?
Most definitely. I mean, she was so precious to him, so important to him, and she was an impressive character. When the two of them were together in public, Grant, who was an unprepossessing individual, there's a moment, if I get around to reading something, you'll see where where I report that he is smaller than his reputation. And that was the way he was, and he was kind of retiring especially when Julia was around. He was a little self-effacing. Where was I going with this? I don't remember.
about General Lee and sort of trying to make him feel better
Yeah.
about that guilt.
That old thing. Yeah. And in fact, it's 2 points about that. One, a book is always a thing of its own time. And although this may seem to be a thing of the 19th century, it's a thing of 2020 and 2024 and the time period when it was written and when it will be published and when it has been published. A guy like me never writes in a vacuum. And not only does he show up on the page, but his surroundings show up on the page. So part of my big concerns in working on this book was the enormous divide in America right now. And some of that I could perhaps be traced to the good-heartedness, the kindness, the openness of Ulysses Grant to loving not only his country, but his opponents, which he did. Ulysses Grant was, and there are a couple of scenes in the novel where I dramatize it, where he says, our job is not to kill boys from Georgia. Our job is to reunite the country. And that was his goal. And when Lee surrendered at Appomattox, the terms of surrender that were drafted by Grant and his associates were extremely lenient. They essentially, to quote the Bible, said, go now and sin no more. Just go home. You can have your horses. You return to the fields, and we're all Americans together again. And you will not be punished. Lee will not be tried. You people, we're all family again. And what a great idea that is. What a great motivator. What a great way to live your life. What a way, I think he thought, we're learning new things about this every day from historians. What a way to set yourself up for only limited success. because some people may accept that forgiveness as license. And I think that's, that to some degree is what happened, and why he ended up during his presidency spending so much time fighting the Ku Klux Klan. Was something that he had fought a whole war over, and here it still is. So I wanted him to be wrestling with that.
Well, and that's a great segue to my next question, which is about when you have soldiers, which we know they would go to Mount McGregor once the news broke that Grant was ill, and kind of camp out, and he would wave to them occasionally. And so there's a quote in the book, in your book, where it says, after a little while, the young man says, "The president is up there, you know." And the soldier replies, "The president, he'll always be the general to me." And obviously he's a soldier, so he would see Grant as the general. But even still today, a lot of people think of and remember Grant and revere him more as the general than as the president. So what is your opinion on that? Generally, as him being known more for that than the presidency? Obviously, your book is The General and Julia, not The President and Julia. So can you talk a little
That
bit
would
about
sound
that?
like some kind of horrible racy thing, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's not a good idea. Yeah, almost unconsciously, it never occurred to me to call it by that name, or to generally hang him on that name. And I think you're right that when we think of Ulysses Grant, we're more likely to think General Grant. And part of that may be the fact that he was such a huge, important part of the resolution of the fighting and the resolution of the Civil War. And that as a president, he was a little bit unremarkable in terms of things that made a long-term dent that we remember. On the other hand, I do notice, and part of writing a novel is rereading it 7,000 times after you're finished, and after it's been bought by the house, and after it's been set in type and all these things. But one thing that I did notice was that I wasn't especially careful about what I called him in narrative. And I rarely called him the president, even when he was the president. And there are only a few scenes where he's during his time there. But after that and during that, I think I called him the general most of the time. And that wasn't because of the title, because I didn't even have the title yet. But it was, I guess you're right. I mean, that's the way I think of him. And yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, very interesting. I just want to remind people, as we're getting close to Q&A, if you do have questions, please make sure you drop them in the Q&A box below your screen. And talking about some of these other characters, I mentioned the soldier, who's Sam Willett, which we may or may not have time to talk about.
I
But
love that guy.
Yeah, he was a great character.
He was a real guy. Sam Willett was a real guy. So yeah.
But I also wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Terrells and I loved them as well. I had never heard of them before, or at least I don't remember hearing about them, but they really were impactful characters. So can you talk a little bit about them and why you decided to add them to the book?
Yeah, thank you for bringing them up. The Terrells are father and son. The father, Harrison Terrell, was Grant's factotum, butler, confidant. I think it was after he'd left the presidency and he was living in New York, that he kind of cadged this butler of his from another friend, a banker in Washington, and the banker had depended on Terrell for years and years and years, and Grant loved him, and he was able to hire him away and bring him to New York, where he was his factotum. He was there all the time, he looked after him. I think there's a point in the book where I point out that he knew exactly how much he ate. He knew exactly how many cigars he smoked. He knew exactly which trousers didn't fit after too long a night at the table. I mean, that's the intimacy that those two had. In fact, Grant didn't call him Terrell. His first name was Harrison, and he called him Faithful Harrison. That was his name for him. And that's a pretty good name to have, Faithful Harrison. Now, Harrison's son, Robert, was actually, this ties back to the old banker as well. The banker funded his going to Bowdoin, I think, and ultimately to Harvard. And he became a hugely well-educated individual, actually well after the events of this particular novel. He became an advisor to President William Howard Taft, and he became a judge in Washington, D.C. He was a very elevated and very highly thought of individual. Now Grant, of course, being a little, uncertain, being proud of himself in some ways, he's proud of Robert because he loves Harrison. He's also a little bit proud of Robert because he feels like he did like he himself, Grant, had succeeded so well in his work in the Civil War that it gave Robert the opportunity that he deserved. He may or may not, he's not wrong about that, but I intend that, or I include that as a way of getting back to his character, that a person would probably think that and couldn't be blamed for it, yet it might not be entirely the most sensitive thing to do. But the two of them, they really form a counterpoint that I love especially. And Faithful Harrison Terrell is with him right till the end. When Grant stops speaking to anybody but the family in the last day or so, that he means the family and Faithful Harrison. Those are the people who have been with him through it all.
And I loved their interactions and learning about them through your novel, because they were these side characters besides Julia and the general, these side characters that are still very vital to this story are just beautifully written in. I just want to say that it was truly amazing. So as we're getting ready for questions, and we're going to have you do a little reading before we get to the audience questions, of course, I have to mention our guy, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. And most of you probably know this already, but Mark Twain's publishing company ends up swooping in and publishing Grant's memoirs, which really saves Julia and the family due to a financial catastrophe that Grant gets involved in. Can you talk a little bit about how Twain was able to help the Grant family out?
Yeah, it was a great treat for me to write for Mark Twain or for Samuel Clemens. And, my experience with and love for Twain goes so far back. And I've had the opportunity, as so many of us have, through the years of listening to his voice in his books and remembering some of the things he said and remembering his marvelous way of putting things. So it was a great chance for me to kind of dig into those things and try to make him talk. It's kind of daring to stand Samuel Clemens up in a book and make him be Samuel Clemens. And in fact, make him declare, you don't need Mark Twain for this, you need Samuel Clemens, which probably was the truth. And yeah, I could hear him saying that, even though I don't know him at all. But yeah, Grant had gotten into huge financial difficulties, had lost every penny through no fault of his own. He found out that he was dying of cancer. He was going to leave nothing to his family, for he had nothing to leave. He had lost his health. He had lost his wealth. He had lost his public standing. And here he was trying to write his memoirs in order to have something that he could sell at the end of his life that would keep his family going, save them from poverty. over the last year of his life, he wrote 300,000 words. This is a big memoir. And he was able to publish it through Mark Twain at the end in a way that he did not live to know, because he actually wrote the final words of the book 3 days before he died. But the book and its publication through Twain's good work saved the family and actually became almost immediately the biggest selling book ever published in America at the time. Now, Twain had seen Grant making a deal with another publisher, with a magazine publisher of all things, and got wind of it and managed to interrupt in time, charging into Grant's office and taking all the cigars he wanted and generally behaving like Sam Clemens would, and persuading him that he was making a terrible mistake by going into business with these particular people, and offering to try to find him another contract or even to publish it himself under terms that were enormously better than anything that had been offered to Grant so far. So Twain really, I mean, his job, his role in helping the whole Grant family was incalculable. And he didn't change a word of the manuscript. He adored the manuscript, and it's still worthy of being adored to this day. It's brilliant. And Twain, of course, recognized that.
Yes. Well, we are going to have Jon read a little bit from the novel. And then after that, I know questions have been coming in. I'll ask a few of those.
If we have questions, maybe we should get to them first.
Sure, we can do that.
I don't want to, you know what? If people want to read the book, if they can call me up and I'll read them a paragraph aloud or two, or they can.
Or Omar's going to be putting the link in the chat, and you can purchase the book because it is amazing.
There you go.
So
the thing that I was going to read is a part. I'll just tell you about it, where he is. Well, I'll read you the very beginning.
Perfect.
He says his farewells to Julia and the children, and he goes by steamboat from St. Louis to Cairo. And once in Cairo, he boards a train for the two-day journey to Chattanooga. Everyone knows him, but no one recognizes him, for he travels, as always, in his natural anonymous state. If he weren't a general, he could be a spy, so unremarkable is his native condition. For one thing, he's smaller than his reputation, smaller and less ornamented and easier to miss. Slouched in his seat and barreling toward Nashville in the gathering twilight, he is clad as unprepossessingly as any rough-knuckled tradesman. He wears cotton trousers of faded blue and a pale gray check shirt minus a collar. His featureless blue overcoat is folded carefully and stowed on the seat to his right. His feet are posted square on the floorboards against the irregular rocking of the train, and upon them he wears black work boots, thorn-scarred and battered. Atop his head is a cap of white wool, knitted for him by his daughter Nellie as a Christmas present, drawn down close to his eyebrows. This is the way that he went through the world. When Lee surrendered to him, Lee was dressed in one of the most gorgeous uniforms imaginable, and Grant was dressed in a muddy uniform he borrowed from a foot soldier. He didn't care. He was who he was, and he did his job. And that's one of the things that caused me to come to respect him so much.
Well, thank you for doing that. So we'll jump into the questions here. So the first one, you spoke about going down rabbit holes while conducting research, but I always describe your writing as not containing even one unnecessary word. How much editing and revising do you do to get to perfection?
Oh, perfection. Well, I'd like to shake this person's hand. At any rate, was that my wife?
It was not.
No? Wow. Let me say this. I was asked earlier today how I know when a book is finished, and my answer was when every damn word is the wrong word. That's how you know when you're done, when you can't even stand to look at it anymore. I'm a very slow writer. I tend to I tend to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. I'm not a guy who writes in longhand, which is a thing that has probably helped cause the deterioration of my handwriting. But the computer is a great aid to me because I generally try every single sentence 5, 6, or 7 ways. And when I get it right, I write the next sentence. And then I realize the sentence that I had just finished should have been inside out. And it takes a long time. But yeah, but I think what the questioner asks or suggests is that one good thing about my decision or my tendency not to chase details in research is that it gives me the opportunity and reinforces my feeling that the best way to set a scene is in small ways and evocative ways. When the porter comes through to light the lamps in that train car, we don't even find out what they're burning. We don't find out who made them. We don't need to there's a lot of things we don't need to find out. All we need is for the stage to be set in a way that affects us. So that's my advice on that front. And the other advice is learn to stop revising. But no, don't ever stop.
That's right. All right, next question is, can you speak to how you bridge the gap between the historian's facts and the novelist's empathy while also navigating a historical figure's worldview that may be very different from our own? For example, views on race and the patriarchy.
Yes, that was a particular concern of mine in that refinement, the second part of the question. One of the things that makes a novel is that the main character or some of the characters or all the characters transform as the novel unfolds, and people grow and their minds change and they learn things as the novel goes by. People call that the arc of the character sometimes. And Grant, who arrives in this particular book in one of the first times we see him, working side by side with some hired white men and some Black slaves, is not especially absorbed in the question of slavery. He feels about the slaves a sympathy, as he would about any working person. And as time goes by, both in the earlier days as he's working on the farm, and he begins to realize that his feelings about these people are different, and at odds with the feelings that his father-in-law has. And then as he takes on the role as a general in the Civil War and begins to wonder about slavery, both as a tool for the South, as a tool for himself to try to defeat the South, and begins to wonder, am I using these Black people as a tool the same way they've been used by other people? These are kind of complex thoughts that I wanted to work out through the course of the novel. These things are things you don't do in a vacuum, of course, and the struggle that I go through with him about that surrender, the moment of surrender where the South gets off a little easier than maybe they might have, is reflective not only of what I know about him and what some new research is just now revealing about him, actually, but of what's in my own head, because we're living through this, and it would be nice if we could all forgive each other. And that was sort of where Grant was coming from in the beginning. He let's be one country again.
These are great questions. Moving on to the next one, another great one. You hint at his presidency as less remarkable, but I've been struck by Chernow's portrayal of how much Grant did do to support African Americans with Reconstruction and fighting the Klan. Is it possible that
Absolutely.
Yep. Is it possible that some of the belittling of President Grant and his character might have been propaganda like the Lost Cause?
I think so. And that's an excellent point. I mean, I think, this is kind of looping back on other things we've said, referring to him as and thinking of him as the general. And those many moments of great heroism and decision making, the darkness that surrounded that, the people he lost, that really puts that general role front and center for us. And I think that's part of why we don't think of him. We don't think of him as the president, and for the things he did accomplish, as the questioner asked, chasing the Ku Klux Klan and working through Reconstruction. But yeah, there was another point I was going to make, but I forgot what it was. I think that's the case, that we should think about him more for those things, because but our brains get clouded by the few big things we know. Isn't that the way it goes? Oh, I know where I was going. I was going to say that there are a lot of people who will tell you that, or who, if they think about Ulysses Grant, think, oh, wasn't he a drunk? The most current understanding of all that is, no, he really wasn't a drunk. He didn't drink any more or less than anyone else. He was addicted to nicotine, that's for sure. But that was a whole different story. And as the questioner suggests, there's a lot of understanding, and I think it makes sense, that the rumors of his alcoholism may also have been put forward by detractors. And those who wanted to discredit him, that was an easy thing to report on. Oh, I saw him drunk at the campfire.
Right. And I also think too, his administration had so many scandals that I think, like the whiskey ring and all that, I think sometimes that overshadowed the really great things, like you mentioned, that he was doing with fighting the Ku Klux Klan. He did a lot for Native Americans during that period, but it kind of all fades. And like you said, it's more about the general. Okay, we have another question. I'm curious about the couple's relationship with Sherman post-war, and about fellow generals and officers' opinions of Julia at war with the general. I know so many had mixed feelings, and how Julia dealt with the harrowing experience of being there with Grant at times.
Yeah, I can't answer the more historical nature of the questions in terms of other generals and other soldiers and how they felt about some of these things. I will instead deflect the question and tell you a funny story. You mentioned General Sherman. Billy Sherman was, of course, a great friend of Grant's, and was among the people who visited him at Mount McGregor as he was on his deathbed. I asked, when we first began to learn about ChatGPT, the artificial intelligence program, I actually asked ChatGPT to write a summary of my book, The General and Julia, and that's all the information I gave it. And one of the best summaries was that it was about General Ulysses Grant and his wife Julia, and her secret love affair with William Tecumseh Sherman.
My gosh.
That's
amazing.
And I realized that I had just missed the boat entirely.
Some fan fiction that can still be written out
coming
there.
Up next. Yeah. The other general and Julia.
Exactly. Oh, that's funny. All right, we have just a couple minutes left. I found a couple questions in the chat. So one of them is, your book, which I must now read, seems to have a form similar to that of Mark Twain's in the autobiography, letting go of chronology and moving from cake to icing and back again. Twain's autobiography similarly moves from the present day, circa 1906, back to Hannibal, then to Hartford, back to Hannibal again, etc. He wrote a brilliant description of why he did this, and I can't possibly reproduce. Was this an inspiration?
Frankly, no. sorry to say. I do love a complicated storyline, though. Finn was as complicated as they come. I mean, it was a story focused on, very closely focused on, an alcoholic, and almost every chapter begins with Finn waking up and not knowing where or when the hell he is. So I wanted readers to kind of get that, to throw them into that pot with that old sot, and have them have to climb out of it the same way he did every time. This is a lot simpler because the main story is indeed chronological, but it does dip around. Then again, not only is Mark Twain one of the secret heroes of this book, but you have to realize that I read a lot of Faulkner in my life. So
Makes sense.
it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to come out.
All right, we're going to do our last question. You mentioned the Troubles, but one of my biggest recollections of Grant as a president and as a man, not a general, but really a harbinger of the Gilded Age. But he seems on the outside in your book, used by Vanderbilt, and maybe a bit of a sad case. That was interesting to me. Was that a choice to make him more human and less of a historical figure on a shelf or an icon?
Yeah, I think we kind of get right back to where you started, which is the you show me a hero and I'll write you a tragedy. Mm. And yeah, Grant in life was a self-effacing person. He was not the hero of his own story as far as he was concerned. As I said, when he was in public with Julia came first. Julia came first in general. But he did not bring a huge ego to these things, and what he brought, from my point of view, was a kind of open-heartedness that sometimes got him in trouble, that let him expect the best out of people who didn't always have the best intentions. That is to say, the less reconstructible of the Southerners and the greedy and duplicitous swindlers who took advantage of him when he had been out of the presidency for a while, and the folks who did the same to him when he was president. He was a little, I don't want to say naive, but I wanted to show the roots of that behavior in a kind of open-hearted kindness, which is what I sent. I mean, I can't say that's the case, but looking at the evidence, we see it again and again in his behavior.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Please make sure, as you can see in the chat, Omar has put the link. Go click on it and order this book. It is fantastic. As I said, gives you so much information and so emotional, and you learn so much about not only Ulysses and Julia, but about all these other fantastic characters. And Jon, thank you so much for all you've done for the Mark Twain House and being such a great friend to us, and also for joining us tonight and sharing all this insight on your fantastic novel. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's always a delight, always a pleasure. And I always tell everybody I know, go to the Twain House, because and we were going there when my daughter was only about maybe 5 years old, and she's 42 now, or 41. So we've been going there. We've been visiting we were visiting well before the museum was built.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a wonderful place, not to be missed. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks so much, Jon, and thanks, Mallory, for being our moderator this evening.
My pleasure.
And yeah, we do want to encourage people to visit us. Tomorrow, we're going to have something really special, a Clemens Christmas preview evening. So you can explore the entire first floor of our historic home at your leisure. And you can also start your holiday shopping early with 20% off at the Mark Twain Store. And then on the 26th, we're going to be celebrating Museum Store Sunday with discounts and food, music, performances, workshops. We're even gonna have Santa and Mrs. Claus, right, Mallory?
Yes.
And it's gonna be really awesome. So please stop on by, see the house and all its beautiful Christmas decorations. And come visit us. And that is all for this evening. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.